Good morning, I'm Dirk Anderson. I head up the BlakYaks business. Welcome to the next BlakYaks podcast. And today I'm joined by Russ Thornton. Very pleased to have Russ along. Russ and I have known each other a while and worked in partnership for the last 10, 12 years, I'm guessing. So thanks for coming, Russ. Thanks for taking part. And if you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself, give a little bit of background to your IT career, your history and what you're doing today. That would be helpful to start with.
Yeah, will do. And it's good to see you again, as always. Yeah. So suffice it to say, I didn't start my career thinking I was going to be in IT. I've got 2 degrees in music, and I moved to San Francisco in 1990 to be a conductor. I was a really good pianist, a really good singer, but not a great one, and so not a great individual contributor. And I found when I was in San Francisco, being a conductor didn't really pay the rent very well. But Silicon Valley, 1990, right place, the right time, got a job temping, and our LA office said, I'm going to send you this thing called a server, and you're going to need to build it.
Right.
So really learned IT right from the ground up. When you did BIOS upgrades, you were plugging in chips, racking servers, crimping cables, setting up some of the first wide area networks. Found I was rather good at it. It paid a lot more money than music did. Moved to London in 98. To live abroad for a year. Met a girl, got married, 2 kids, 28 years later, still here. Yeah. But didn't have sort of the traditional CTO, CIO route. I worked for Reuters for a while, setting up big dealing rooms. I worked for a Japanese bank, writing our own sort of futures and option systems. I started up a couple of companies then sold them on, and have been working back in the city since about 2012. And for me, that kind of ability to be good at technology, but not great at any one, has really been kind of my strong suit because I know how to bring people together with different disciplines. And I've had a bit of a meandering experience that allows me to look at technology kind of from a 360 perspective.
Yeah. And today, where have you landed? What's your role today for the audience, Russ? And what are you doing?
I'm now a Chief Technology Officer at Nottingham Building Society and been there for just under a year.
Fairly fresh still.
Still fairly fresh, a lot to do. And suffice it to say, there's a perception that building societies can be kind of old and sleepy. I found that's really not to be the case. The sector is definitely going under a modernization and rejuvenation phase.
Got it. And I've known you a while, Russ, so I'm aware of your track record doing cloud transformation, and that's been a big part of your life, is helping businesses and teams transform through cloud transformation programs in a variety of companies, largely financial services. So it'd be good to get a sense from you, those cloud transformation projects, what business drivers in your experience has sat behind those, and refer to the work that you're doing at the Nottingham Building Society. What's really driving that at board level, and what are the opportunities or the challenges that you're looking to overcome?
God, I think that the first thing from an approach perspective that I take is really understanding what are the business outcomes that they're trying to achieve, what are the pain points to get there, versus it being a cloud transformation. So cloud is a key enabler, it's a powerful enabler, but you really have to spend the time as a CTO really getting into the depths of the strategy and what they're trying to achieve. For Nottingham, we have a concept called extraordinary borrowers. So people who don't necessarily qualify for a traditional high street loan. They might have had a life event. They might have a partner who's a foreign national, or they might have a thin credit file. And we want to be able to say yes more often, but not add more risk to the bank. That's a huge driver for us. And it's a massive market across the UK, but in particular in the region that we serve. And on the other side, from a deposits perspective, we've got 31 branches. We've got great colleagues in those branches, Trustpilot scores of 4.8, which is brilliant, but it's only 31 branches. And we need to scale our ability to hoover in deposits in order to give the oxygen to the lending side of things. And then the third business driver is something that Sue Hayes, our CEO, recognized probably a couple years ago, is that there had been a significant lack of investment in sort of core infrastructure. So a lot of the building blocks that you have to have in place before you can even think about doing anything in the cloud needs to be there. She had, and my predecessor started kicking that off, and my job has been sort of to finish the job on that in order to then help unlock that EOB, that extraordinary borrower proposition, and also be able to expand our sort of digital savings proposition.
Yeah, and that's driving cloud, and I'm guessing there's a whole array of services in the cloud environment that enables and makes that easier for you to do. I'm thinking about digital and online, and the pervasive nature of cloud services means that's just, it's in front of you in a way that maybe it would be hardest to do on premise. And getting the mix right, I guess, is going to be important to you guys.
Yeah, I completely agree. And luckily for myself, the cloud environment was very, very nascent just at the beginning steps when I got to the society.
So you weren't having to sell it.
It didn't have to sell it. It was a greenfield opportunity, and also the cloud's been around a lot. So a lot of the challenges I had back at Shawbrook back in late 2018, when the regulator was more worried about cloud, board was still worried about cloud. A lot of those worries have gone away. Yeah. The biggest worry at the society was, do we have the right skills? Do we have the right partners on the pitch? Do we know how to design elegantly versus just letting pound notes fly out the door?
Yeah.
And that's where I've been able to bring my experience of the past to make sure that we have a laser-like focus on the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and not only make the best of cloud in terms of being able to spin stuff up, but also spin stuff down.
Yeah, got it. So, Russ talked briefly about business transformation, how that's driven cloud transformation within organisations that you've been working on for the last 10 years or so. I think in smaller environments, it's really easy to get this stuff done, but in large, regulated industries of the type and nature that you've been exposed to, Russ, it's harder than that. Any organisation with scale, it's not as easy as just getting going and embarking on cloud transformation. You will have undoubtedly run into road bumps along the way, challenges that you've had to overcome and get the support of people in your organisation and others to help you overcome. When you think about that, what could you share with the listener? Some of your experiences about things that you really need to work hard to get through and overcome along the way. Yeah,
and it's different problems with big companies and small companies, but they do share some common problems. Yeah. One is, it's a phrase I like to say, common sense isn't typically common practice. Yeah. In that being able to make people sort of think from a common sense perspective versus over-egging things is really quite hard. It takes a lot of emotional energy. You need to be able to bring people along on the journey. You need to understand people's worries, thoughts, fears from their own perspective. Yep. Business people might be able to say, oh, yes, of course we need cloud because we need to do blah, 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 blah. But what about risk? What about finance? What about, legal, compliance? How do you get them to understand what's going on to reduce that FUD, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that can pervade? But I think the more time you spend with that up front, the better, because otherwise it's just going to slow you down in the future. And also the more you get people along to begin with, the more you get sort of a sense of a cultural change, because ultimately change is about people. It's not about technology. And if you don't have everybody working together, all humans on the pitch, not just the full-timers, but the partners, et cetera, if you don't have them all rowing together in the same way, feeling like they're part of the same team, you're going to have a lot more issues than if you didn't spend that time in advance.
For sure. You touched on some interesting points that I've experienced myself there, Russ. We have seen businesses that we have worked with get, for example, the cyber teams or the InfoSec teams involved way too late in these programs, or they've failed to solicit board level buy-in at the right levels, not just from a budget standpoint, but also commitment to that program, that change, and all the risk that comes with that. And I think you're absolutely right. And then you've got that fear within teams of there's a new skill set and capability that I have to acquire here that I've got no doubt I can acquire, but I'm not quite ready for it just yet. Anything you could share around some of those points about those subgroups of people that you've, as you've said, you've got to row in the right direction and bring on the journey a little bit with you? Yeah,
and I think sometimes it comes down to you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that sort of educational piece is really important. And you need people to be able to raise their hands and say, look, I don't know about this. But also you need to have your sort of your spidey sense on full alert to say, is that person saying they understand, or do they really understand it? Do I need to have a one-to-one? Do I need to bring in smaller subgroups to sort of walk people through it? But I think the important thing as well is you can't sort of promote the cloud as magic. It's neither magic nor free. Steve Jobs had a great quote that all change is only net good. So you need to be able to show a sense of balance of the things that are positive about going to cloud and also things that we need to watch out for. And also that gives people in, let's say, finance or risk or InfoSec a sense of purpose in terms of what their part in the plan is versus it being done to them. They feel like they're a part of it and are sort of contributing to it.
Yeah, and I guess your execution matters, right? I mean, right across our industry. I was on the buy side before I was ever on the sell side, so I bought these services from partners, from large operators like Microsoft, and of course they want to sell, and they want to sell at volume to you, and you've got to wade your way through that, haven't you, to make sure that you're doing the thing that's right for your business, for your own customer base, and it's a tricky balance, isn't it, to strike between what's right for us versus investments we've already made. I think there's a really interesting balance, especially in an organisation that has real scale to it. Where do we get real net new value from these services that we didn't have before? And I'm really clear about that versus what we've already invested in. And, and rightfully the board are going to say, well, we've made those investments before you got here, Russ. I would imagine you've run into that, and we've got to get the best of those and get some kind of a return on those versus investment in new strategies like cloud. Right?
Yeah, and it's tricky because with my business hat on, I want to deliver just what the business needs, not everything else that could be around it. But with my CTO hat on, I need to have a landing zone or a series of landing zones that is capable to scale massively, but not cost the earth to begin with. And I think it's that balance to make sure that you've got the infrastructure ready, robust, secure, hugely capable of scaling, but only scale it when you have a business need.
When you're ready. And we've seen the errors of other businesses' ways where made decisions to terminate data center contracts, going through really large lift and shift exercises, we know it, to just get off of data center into cloud, and they begin to find themselves in a position where the cost profile isn't any better, can be more expensive. So you've really got to get this balance right between things that have to be run as they are today, but maybe running in cloud instead of on-premise, but also the opportunity to modernize and use this new array of services, like you say, Russ, that you can spin up easily, spin down, and get the cost profile just right for your own organization.
Yeah, and this whole environment has changed so much over the last 10, 12, 15 years. Certainly 7 years ago when I started at Shawbrook, we had limited data center space, limited rack space, couldn't really scale it out. So then, cloud was just about swing space and pure capacity, but it's really expensive. And some applications don't like running in cloud. They don't spin up and spin down. And then sort of fast forward to now in terms of the co-located data center providers and the hardware you can get from Dell and from HPE provide me with a lot of optionality. Yep. So if I've got sort of a legacy core banking or ledger system that needs to run 24/7 on some pretty big kit, it's actually cheaper to run that inside the data center. But if I really want to touch, customers or colleagues or brokers or at scale, cloud's much better for that. And certainly if you want to start looking at any kind of analytics capability, trying to do what you can do in Fabric or in AWS's, data lake technologies, trying to do that on premise is difficult, if not nigh on impossible. So it's really trying to pick the right place to put the workload that you need to deliver.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. You spoke about getting the balance right, Russ, between where to use cloud and where to stick with some on-premise investments that you've already made. I guess I've seen it, and I'm sure you've seen it, but there are opportunities to go and innovate with cloud in a way that would be really difficult to do with on-premise when we think of traditional on-premise of the past. So it'd be good to get you to touch a little bit more on your experience, your very deep experience in that, and where have you been able to do stuff that cloud and cloud-native technologies have been a real enabler for in terms of driving innovation for scenarios that you've had to overcome.
Yeah, I think the first one was back probably when the cloud was just starting, when it was Azure Service Manager before Azure Resource Manager back in 2007. I was working for a global strategy company that helped, companies like Walmart, Pfizer, Diageo set their corporate strategy and pressure test it. and that was with a set of software that I helped write. But they were all over the world, and we didn't have enough money to have data centers all over the world. So being able to put that into cloud environments, in either Japan or in the States or in Europe or in Africa, meant that this little small consultancy company had this power of compute to be able to then help technology drive corporate strategy. And that's where I first came a little bit addicted to cloud at that point, in terms of seeing the capability that that smaller companies can provide. I think if you then fast forward to the last couple of years at Shawbrook, and when you look at the core banking environment, a lot of times it's filled with great feature-rich platforms that are built on more sort of, let's say, Oracle stacks, more sort of, older architectural stacks. We implemented thought machines, real-time, event-driven core, right. And trying to do that on-premise, would be next to impossible, but also to build the ecosystem that you need to around some of these dynamic cores for payments interfaces, colleague interfaces, data interfaces. Again, on-premise would have been next to impossible. But now Shawbrook have this Thought Machine core that lets them create dynamic products that previously would have been next to impossible to do. So they made the core into not a commodity, but a differentiator, which again in the banking world is really very very innovative and very modern.
Yeah, I think there's a theme in this discussion, Russ, around making really intelligent choices about where cloud's absolutely the right fit. Certainly the business that I'm operating in and the customers that we serve, we spend a lot of time when we look at these large transformation and migration projects, working with senior stakeholder communities to really understand how we get that fit right. How do we move towards cloud native and more serverless than PaaS service, because it absolutely makes sense. And you tick boxes in a whole variety of different ways. I mean, we see all sorts of long-term benefits from getting that stuff right around very predictable security posture, being able to change and enhance your security posture quickly, your ability to recover from a whole variety of failure scenarios. But you need to be very disciplined right at scale to make sure that everybody in the team then commits to that as a method. So if you're deploying and managing systems with code, which we do a lot of, which really is enabled through a lot of those cloud native services, then you need to be disciplined to keep it that way, because your ability to recover and stay secure and stay reliable. And you touched earlier, Russ, about being able to scale really readily and quickly to cater with changing business needs. That only comes about because you've got the foundations, the architecture, the platform design right in the first place. So I couldn't agree more with that point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sometimes it's hard for teams to maintain that discipline because of business pressures. Why can't you deliver it faster? Why are you doing all this technological work when actually we just want the outcome? And I spend a lot of my time storytelling. Stories are 10 times more likely to stick versus fact. Yeah. So how do you bring the example of why is DevOps important? What does that do from a business perspective? Yeah. What is a landing zone? And I did a Janet and John series at both Shawbrook and at NBS about telling a story about what a data lake is. What is a cloud deployment? What is a landing zone? Just to try and put things into practical terms so that people can internalize the benefit therein, which gives the developers and the infrastructure folks the ability to that time and space to do things properly.
And I'm guessing that's understood by some of the infrastructure guys, but maybe development and product communities, and also senior leadership and board level members that need to buy into this strategy, maybe hearing some of this stuff from the first time. Why should the business care, I guess, is what the bit that you need to straddle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest challenges I have at board is board members being stung in other boards that they've been on in terms of the high cost of cloud. Yeah. When they hear data lake, they just see pound notes going out the door. And how can I convince them that we're going to do things differently versus what they've seen in the past? Yeah. And it just takes a huge laser-like focus right from the engineer spinning up things to say, okay, well, if you spin things up, they got to be shut down at 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. And really making sure that discipline is understood and executed upon. But that storytelling is really very, very important for my role in particular.
Yeah, and we've been here before, Russ. When I think about when we moved away from client, PC, server, distributed systems, before hypervisors and virtualization, before VMware ever come along, or Hyper-V, because it was easy to deploy stuff quicker, the demand become more pent up. But that all that rigor that you talk to still needs to exist. So we, as an industry, we should have kind of learnt this already. If you offer things quicker, the demand is higher, and then you've got a front door that you're dealing with that you didn't have before. I guess the same is true of cloud services, but I've been in my dev sandbox space, and I could rapidly instantiate AI services and container services, and why can't we get it deployed into production really quickly? It's harder than that, isn't it? Because of the need for security and compliance and regulatory compliance, as well as just making sure that you can operate this thing for the next however long the service is going to be around.
Yeah, indeed. And I also think the cloud service providers, the marketing departments, didn't do the industry any favors in terms of, it's all open, it's all public, which just spooked everybody who was worried about security, compliance, regulation, etc. And we've kind of had to unpick that a lot over the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, and we're doing less of it. I think you said earlier in the session, Russ, about having to battle with that stuff 5, 6, 7 years ago. And largely, I think that's gone. I mean, I see a lot of customers week in, week out, and I think that has gone away. The industry's dealt with the fact that you absolutely can make cloud really secure, but it's all to do with your design, your implementation. You shouldn't really rely exclusively on the hypervisors, the hyperscalers. They've got their bit to do, and of course, you're expecting them to protect in the same way that you would protect your assets once you've got them on there.
Yeah, not just protect, but evidence that you're protecting it, and that's one thing that I really lean quite heavily on with DevOps to say, how do you know your deployment has gone well? Just look at the log files; it's all there, and that ability to say, how secure is your environment? Well, if I go onto Secure Center, I can tell that I'm at 97%, etc. Showing that evidence and that fact is hugely, hugely powerful, and that's what you get from automation.
Yeah. So lots of experience in this space with business leaders and cloud transformation projects. When you reflect on that 10 years or so of doing this, Russ, if you were to just pick 3-4 key lessons for the audience to hear from your own experience, what would those be?
I think the first one is have a trusted network around you at all times. Yep. And if I go back to being a conductor waving a baton with no orchestra is pretty useless. Yep. So you need to have that trusted team of humans, regardless of where they work, because people move from client side to vendor side, etc. Always keep the network going, because you can't think of everything, you can't know everything, best patterns, practices, etc. So keep that network alive at all times. And I think the next one is back yourself. It's quite easy as you go further in your career for sort of imposter syndrome to come in. But if something smells wrong, something's wrong in there. If something feels right and it's not happening, find a way to get that over the line. But that confidence and trust in yourself is super, super important. And I think the last one is try and have a bit of fun. Yep. There's a great but wacky movie called Everything Everywhere All at Once. And one of the characters has this great scene where he says, some people think I'm silly and try and make people too happy, and that's a failure, when actually that's a strategy. Yeah. And that kind of resonated with me, because life is hard enough. This stuff is really quite intense. If you can't sort of promote a culture where people can have a bit of a giggle, have a bit of laugh, then it's really not kind of worth it. Yeah. Plus, you actually get more out of people when they're more comfortable. So those are kind of 3 things. Keep that network around you, back yourself, and try and have a bit of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I've known you a while, Russ, and we've worked together quite a long time, and I've heard that phrase, spidey sense, and trusted your spidey sense quite a lot over the years. But it's absolutely true. You can't always have the scientific facts in front of you. You have got to look people right in the white of the eyes, and then your spidey sense will come through. Do we make that call? Do we take that risk? Do we go and make that investment? Ideally, it's backed by evidence, but you have got to trust your gut sometimes, haven't you? Absolutely.
There's just so much ambiguity in every decision that you make. You want as much evidence as you can, but then ultimately you gotta crack on and make a choice.
Yeah. So looking forward a little bit, Russ, I mean, I think we, as technology leaders, we often find ourselves in the middle of executing some strategy. It's either your own or it's someone else's, or it's a blend of the two, but most large businesses are always running strategic initiatives and programs of some type. And then new stuff comes along, right? The industry changes. The one thing that's really enjoyable about the technology industry is it's fast-paced, that you can look forward to change that makes you want to get up in the morning and go and do it again. So when you look out to the next 2 or 3 years, I mean, AI is a great example of a technology that's got it to become ubiquitous, pervasive, not just through our own daily lives, but also within the enterprise. You look out for the next 2 or 3 years, and you were thinking about if you had the opportunity to transplant real capability into your team, and I mean the one team, whether it's partners, your own team, the network of people that you would trust to help you with the strategy that you think may arrive, you may have to pivot around over the next 2 or 3 years. What would those capabilities look like?
I think I'd probably break it down into 3 different capabilities. One would be around pervasive cloud security. I still have a worry that there are so many different attack vectors that people can get in. If there was some magic wand capability that was continuously scouring your network for ways to get in, throwing alerts, blocking things.
For emerging risks.
For emerging risks, especially emerging AI risks. That would be huge. I think the other pervasive capability I'd love to see, not only at the society, but just more broadly, is really around data and not just sort of having data, but really, really properly using it and using it in your thinking, not just having it at your fingertips.
Yep.
And I think for me, probably the most important is curiosity. As a capability, I think is absolutely vital. It's typically the curious people, pre-AI, that were the ones who were the problem solvers, the ones that found new ways of doing it. And I think even with AI, it's even more important to be even more curious in terms of how you prompt AI, how you use it. I think that creativity and that curiosity, if you can get that pervasive across an organization, you're just going to unlock so much potential. Doesn't matter what kind of company you're in.
Yeah, and on the last point, Russ, we spend a lot of time in BlakYaks exposing everyone as much as we can do to our own lab environment to go and play with these technologies in a safe space, just to be curious and go and figure out what you could achieve. And we see it for the people that come through our academy, the people that have typically left university with STEM degrees. You open those guys up to the lab and you arm them with a collection of AI tools. It's quite remarkable how curious they can get.
Absolutely. And if you take that outside of the tech world, in our risk departments, in our audit departments, using AI to say, how can we streamline these policies? How can we streamline our asset class policies? How can we streamline our audit reports, to make things simpler, more understandable, more effective? That's another great opportunity for especially for big banks and big organizations to use AI to be curious about how you can make stuff more effective.
Yeah, I think there's a whole other podcast there, Russ. How do we bridge pervasive use of AI and the wide array of tool sets alongside business process re-engineering, because that's ultimately what it is, right? AI is going to change how we think about business process, procedures, sub-processes, and at some point the grown-ups in the room need to get their hands around how you maintain that stuff going forward.
Yeah, AI is now a fundamental part of the tech stack, and it will be forever, and is how best to unlock it.
Great. Well, once again, Russ, thanks for coming along today and giving us your time. It's a real pleasure, as always. Thank you.
Pleasure. Yeah, great to see you.
Cheers.